Esther. What they're talking about there ties in beautifully with what we're thinking about and examining this morning. We are in our last and final preaching sermon on our fasting series. And over the last few weeks, we have dug into what the purpose of fasting is all about in our spiritual formation and in our journey to become more like Jesus. We've looked at how fasting helps us yield our bodies and our minds to God, how it fastens us to Him, and how it helps us reorder our desires, and how fasting helps us seek and hunger for more of God. And today we're looking at the final dimension of fasting, and that's how it helps us align our hearts to God's heart, particularly for the poor, including those who are trapped in cycles of suffering, marginalized, oppressed, exploited, hungry, homeless. I want you to think for a moment first, though, to when you're a kid. Think of a meal that you really, really didn't like eating. Any thoughts on that? I'll tell you mine in a minute. Liver. Ooh, that's a generation thing. Davey, you're showing your age. Liver. Anything else that was pretty hard to palate? Tripe. I've never even tried that. Anything else? Sheep intestine soup? In Bulgaria, of course. And you're a veggie as well, Ruth. Haggis. Bad haggis. I like veggie haggis. So for me, when I was maybe quite young, it was stew. It was cheap stew, the type that was really impossible to chew and even harder to swallow. And it was a great victory for me when I announced at the age of 7 that I was going to become a vegetarian. So no more stew for me. It was such a victory. But I remember my mum employing all the tactics to try and get me to eat this stew. And I remember, if you might remember as well, the classic line used to coerce into getting you to eat this stew. And I confess before you, I have also used it on my own children. Sorry, kids. And it goes something like this. You will eat that stew, young lady, because don't you know there are thousands of children around the world that would be so glad to have that plate of food in front of them because they today are going without anything. Does that sound familiar? Hands up if you've used it on your own kids. Yeah. Sorry, kids. This goes round and round and round, doesn't it? And while this isn't the best parenting technique that we could all employ, there's actually truth in it, isn't there? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. There are children in our community who don't have enough. And perhaps it was also your experience when you were a child. Maybe there actually wasn't enough. Across the UK, child poverty has skyrocketed along with the cost of living. Across the world, it's estimated that 2 billion people live in poverty and 700 million face hunger and malnourishment. And it's so easy to feel completely overwhelmed by the scale and the crisis of the suffering of the poorest at the moment, particularly just now. So what on earth can fasting and skipping our meals contribute to this conversation and the plight of the poor? Well, as we'll explore today, the practice of fasting is in fact a key way to connect us to the reality of those who suffer and who don't have enough. And the result of this practice isn't for us to sit in guilt over not having enough food, as we probably did when we looked at that meal that we couldn't stomach and we're like, oh, I can't eat it, but I feel guilty. It's not about that. Because the end result of fasting is that we have our hearts aligned to God in a way that propels us to prayer and action on behalf of the poor and oppressed. Fasting, as we'll see, can bring God's kingdom to earth in such practical ways. And if there's a passage in the Bible that sums up God's heart for the poor and what biblical fasting is all about, then it's Isaiah 58. Just to give some context for this passage, the people of God had been exiled in Babylon, and they'd only recently returned to Jerusalem, but they were back. And their mission now was to rebuild everything that had been destroyed. And we hear in this passage that they're actually petitioning God because they feel He's not listening. They feel their prayers are going unanswered, and he's not helping them. And so then God speaks starkly through Isaiah to tell his people that they've actually forgotten the heart of worship and the whole point of fasting. Let's read from verse 3. The words will be on the screen. Shout it aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. This is what God is saying to Isaiah. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem so eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions, and they seem eager for God to come near them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves, and you have not noticed? Yet, on the day of your fasting, you do as you please. You exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen, only for a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? And here we go from verse 6. God says, is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loosen the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not turn away from your own flesh and blood. Fasting for God's people at this point in time had become anything but worshipful. It had become like a religious tick box, all head and no heart. They were treating God a bit like a vending machine. They were saying, look, we've fasted. We've put our coins in the slot. We've made appropriate sacrifices according to the law. Why aren't you answering our prayers? The author, Skye Jethani, puts it like this. Their worship was inward and disconnected from the needs of those around them. That was the big problem. And God, through Isaiah, outlines what true worship and true fasting looks like, which is the type that makes a difference to the world. God's heart is that people are fed, clothed, sheltered, freed from injustice, and that the fasting and the worship he requires his people to do is truly worshipful because it impacts everybody. God is looking for hearts which are so aligned to him and therefore always moving towards others in compassion. The people of God were doing the exact opposite. Instead of moving towards others in compassion, they were distancing themselves from the poor and vulnerable. They were exploiting those among them who were poor and vulnerable. Even though they themselves had been oppressed quite recently in Babylon, the sad reality was that they had slipped into becoming the oppressors. And the same challenge applies to us today when we think through how we truly worship God. Justice and righteousness are never add-ons to the gospel. They are who God is. So we can't separate them out when it comes to how we actually follow Jesus. Remember that Jesus in Luke 4 sets out the mission of God, his mission, when he reads from Isaiah 61 in the temple, which says this. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And Jesus' mission is our mission. As a church, we've made Isaiah 61 that scripture as the foundation of our ministry here. And we're going to be doing a preaching series coming up after Easter on that, and we'll explore that more. But the point is that any spiritual practice, any of our worship, should have the effect of bringing us into alignment with God's heart, to love him, to love others, and desire to see his kingdom come on earth, especially in the lives of the poor. So how does the practice of fasting make us more aligned to God's heart? How do we avoid it becoming just a tick box exercise? And how does going without food actually help us to fulfill God's mission to love others and move us towards the poor and the oppressed? Well, firstly, fasting makes us pay attention to the needs of others. There's nothing like a pang of hunger during a fasting day to get my attention. And it can often feel like a constant drumbeat in my body. And while I still wrestle to get my mind off myself and whatever food I'm craving or I'm planning to eat that night, and when my body's feeling weak, it can also be a distraction. But what I've started to do is to try and pay attention to that feeling of hunger and then use it to direct me to thinking about those who aren't going without any food that day, who are going without food that day. And it reminds me of the fact that I have never had to go hungry. I've always had enough. What a privilege. And feeling hungry for me highlights the huge disparity between those who have enough and those who don't. And God really wants us to pay attention to this. In Luke chapter 16, Jesus tells his disciple the parable of a rich man who we're told lived in luxury in a big mansion, fine linen, food of choice. And there's a man called Lazarus who was as poor as they came. He was afflicted by poor health. He had sores across his body, and he lay at the gate of the rich man's house begging. The rich man ignores the beggar, and over the course of the time, the beggar dies, and so does the rich man. But the inference is that the rich man will have passed by in his lifetime Lazarus so many times, coming and going from his big mansion, and he ignored him. He never paid Lazarus any attention. And the parable ends with Lazarus receiving eternal life, but the rich man does not, because he ignored the law of Moses and had taken no care of those who were in need. Jesus is saying that those who are aligned with God's heart don't ignore the plight of others. Paying attention to those in desperate need is what followers of Jesus do. One writer in Lectio 365 puts it like this. He says, "Justice begins when I pay attention, when I refuse to walk by." Fasting and hunger gets my attention. It makes me stop and think about those in need, to notice them during my day. There are so many situations of injustice that I'm perhaps complicit in, that I become so apparent of when I allow God to have my attention. And once I've paid attention in my mind and my body, the experience is I've experienced the second way that fasting aligns me with God's heart, and that is with empathy. Fasting increases our empathy. Fasting is a small but physical way of entering into the world of those who don't have enough and who are suffering. The pastor and preacher Tyler Staton says this: "Scripture says that we have a great high priest who can empathize with our weakness. And so one way I can become more like Jesus is I willingly discomfort my body through fasting in a way that other people who don't have enough are unwillingly discomforted. And the reason I do that is so I can grow in empathy. When we grow in empathy, we become more like Jesus. The incarnation itself, when God became man, was the most empathetic act there has ever been. The Word became flesh and dwelled among us. It's the epitome of empathy. And as Philippians 2 tells us, Jesus willingly and sacrificially gave himself, his whole body, as he suffered the weight of sin and death for the whole world. Jesus embodies empathy. And fasting provides a small but significant opportunity to discomfort our bodies in a way that allows us to become more empathetic towards those who are suffering and have then compassion on them. The word compassion literally means co-sufferer. And the practice of fasting is the smallest of windows into the suffering of others in order to almost lament each other's situation and enter into people's grief in a tangible way. The concept of this, though, of entering into somebody else's suffering goes against all my instincts. I don't know about you. If we're honest, it's hard to feel our own pain, let alone the pain of others. And our culture promotes this numbing of the pain and avoiding it at the risk that we could become overwhelmed or because it will cost us if we care. But what that does is it disconnects us from God and it disconnects us from others. The words of Isaiah we read at the beginning are, "Do not turn away from your own flesh and blood." God says, pay attention and feel what those in need are feeling. And when we do this, we actually become more human, like we were designed from the very beginning. We become more human and we become more like God. Like our great high priest, we align our hearts to his and we become less distant from others and we reconnect with each other. Increasing our empathy in our physical bodies helps us to see the poor not as strangers, but as our brothers and sisters, our own flesh and blood, fellow image bearers of God. And thirdly, because fasting makes us pay attention to those in need and then increases our empathy for all those who are suffering, fasting moves us from apathy to action. Setting aside a day a week to fast can actually become a catalyst to do something practical about the suffering around us. Fasting can be the practical outworking of loving God and loving our neighbor and doing justice. It's really quite exciting. The Israelites in Isaiah 58 had forgotten this. The late Pope Francis famously went as far as saying this about the practice of fasting and the whole point of it. He said, "Does my fast help others? If not, it's fake." Pretty stark words, aren't they? What goes hand in hand with fasting is prayer and giving. Before I begin a fast, I ask God to give me the names of 2 people that he wants me to focus on praying for when I feel hungry. So I use my hunger as a cue to direct my mind and my heart to those people, and I pray for them. And my experience over the last few weeks in particular is that God has actually given me a deeper connection with those people, and I've had more opportunity to offer help to them in their situations, and my heart has been changed. It's felt more in tune with how God wants me to be and how he wants to use me. And as well as having that intentional thought for those who are in need, you can use your hunger pangs to stand in prayer against the systems of injustice, the principalities and powers that Paul talks about that sort of perpetuate the systems of injustice that exist in our society. Use the time that you'd have spent eating to confess how we're complicit with these systems and to lift up the catastrophic world situations and declare that God is still king of this world, even when the powers that be act as if he's not. There's something so powerful about fasting that gives us the spiritual strength to pray for those we know in our communities and to pray and battle in that space where there are strongholds of evil and injustice. And then as well as prayer, we can turn our apathy into action through our giving and sharing what we have. So giving our money, giving our time, in service of those in need and campaigning against the systems of injustice. As we've touched on, the amount of people and places that are needing our prayers and our action is completely overwhelming. And we can feel so burdened that we just are a bit like a rabbit in the headlights. We just don't know where to start. But there's a practical and proximate and relational outworking of fasting that's actually been part of the church since the earliest beginnings. That can actually free us from this rabbit in the headlights apathy state, our sense of helplessness, and move us towards the need. When we read about the church in Acts, it was a church and a community where wealth was shared among all the believers. Acts 4:34 says, there was no needy person among them. And listen to this quote from a man called the Shepherd of Hermas, a church leader, detailing instructions to the church in the 2nd century about fasting and giving. He says this: estimate the cost of the food that you would have eaten on that day and give that amount to a widow, an orphan, or someone in need. Be humble in this way, that the one who receives something because of your humility may fill his soul and pray to the Lord for you. So the person that has money gives to another who doesn't, and in turn, the recipient will pray for the giver. This is such a beautiful picture of the community of the church, interdependent on one another. No pride or hierarchy, not the haves and the have-nots. They're just meeting each other's needs because they've been intentional about their practice of fasting. This is such a simple but achievable way for everyone to contribute to the flourishing of the church community. At the World Day of Prayer on Friday, we sang an old song called the Servant Song, which I haven't sung in years, which has these beautiful words which sum up the mutual care for one another that fasting results in. The words are, brother, sister, let me serve you. Let me be as Christ to you. I should really sing it. Pray that I might have the grace to let you be my servant too. Now, I am so grateful that we as a church community represent the whole breadth of the socio-economic demographic. We are a mixed bunch, basically. And that's the way it absolutely should be. And as a church, we regularly look out for each other's needs. And we regularly and consistently reach out to those in need and who are on the margins. But there's always more that we can do, both personally and together in our life as a community. And fasting regularly provides an intentional and consistent way to explore this. So what would it look like for you to save the money you would have spent on food that day when you're fasting and give it away, even if it's just a $5? Well, let me give you some practical examples that I've been thinking about. As a church, we've asked people, if possible, to fast on Fridays. And we have amazing ministries that run on Fridays. So, for example, we have the Charter Cafe, which is free to those who aren't able to pay. So how about you pay your lunch forward that day so that someone else can get a meal? And if your area, you could spend in the area during that time, why don't you just spend your lunch hour with the people who are in the cafe, then hop onto the prayer meeting at 1 p.m. as well? There's also the Bethany Caravan, which parks on Westmuir Street every Friday. And they're actually actively looking for volunteers just now. They want people to pray for their ministry, to serve the soup, or donate tea, coffee, and sugar from time to time. Bethany Christian Trust regard that caravan as the key to their frontline presence to those who are most in need in this community. They so appreciate our partnership with them. And that ministry is such a great example of paying attention to those in need, stopping for the one, and bringing the love of Jesus to those on the streets around us. Could you lend a hand to that? Recovery Church also runs once a month, as we know, on Fridays. Could you donate what you've saved in food that day to the running of the refreshments that are provided for Recovery Church? or the running costs of toddlers on a Friday morning, which is a free group but supports many, many vulnerable families. And if your work or study or care commitments means that you're not in the community on a Friday, could you set aside your saved money to donate to any of the other ministries that are close to your heart? Could you put your items in the shopping basket that you've got when you're shopping to your local supermarket's food bank? Could you make a meal for someone that you know is in need? Send it to a neighbour. Or if those options don't work for you weekly, how about you save that $5 or $10 each week and commit to blessing the Malawi Delitso project that we support? Or send the children to Sunday school camp? Or families to North Break? Or send an extra team member to the team that go to Bulgaria regularly? Send it to NIM, NCM, Nazarene Compassionate Ministries that we've heard about this morning. Or, I'm not afraid to ask, donate to the Restore Anti-Trafficking charity, of which I'm a chair. There are so many ways that fasting creates tangible opportunities for intentional service for those in need. And when we keep committing to this and doing this together, we could have an even bigger reach with the kindness and love of Christ. So my encouragement to each one of us is to be really intentional with your time of fasting, and let's see how God works. I'm going to invite Chris up to come and share a wee bit of testimony before we finish. He's going to speak about how he's found the fasting practice. And just so you know, it's kind of his fault that we're doing this series on fasting, because as a life group, when we did it in the autumn, Chris was so passionate about it, he went, Shelley, we need to do a fasting series at church. So it's thanks to him that we are learning this amazing practice. So Chris, I'm just going to ask him a few questions, and I'll use this microphone. So could you tell us, please, what was your experience of fasting before you did the course in your life group?
I think before, nothing, absolutely nothing. And I don't know if that's been through me being I've had an unhealthy, I think, kind of relationship with food. I've always loved food and just I've always seen it as like that's mine. Because I think through that, I've never really attempted it or consciously done it because I've went, no, that's not for me, kind of thing. Yeah, so I think that
shares the consensus of most people in the room.
You're just surrounded by food as well, which is hard. It's one of the ones it's a bit of a struggle.
Yep. Oh. So how has the experience of fasting increased your empathy for those who don't have enough, and how has it changed your perspective on food and sharing resources?
It's been a strange one because I didn't think I would be affected by it. Purely because I always thought it's not for me, kind of thing. It's never really understood it until we did it as a life group, and it was kind of hit me like a train, I think. Especially this part of it, just the poor side of thing, where we, I think, get it quite easy. I don't know what it is to be poor, so it's something I've never really related to. So it was a bit of a hit me when John Mark Coleman was talking about the other side of it, and just how we don't appreciate, especially food and things like that. Like, we just waste so much. And he stated a whole load of American facts, obviously, so, and it was quite staggering, kind of thing. So I went through a wee Google kind of rabbit hole and was like kind of searching for UK ones, and it's actually quite shocking how much food we waste each year. And the biggest ones is households, which is us. It's not even like supermarkets and stuff like that. They probably contribute quite a lot as well, but it's us, and it's like something approximately like 9.5 million tonnes a year, which could, I think they were saying something like it could feed like up to 30 million people around the world. And we do have people around the world who are starving, who are dying through not having food to eat or being malnourished and all that stuff. And it's a bit, so it kind of hit me. And we do have it, even though we might not see it in other countries, and it's probably maybe more severe in other countries because they may have famines. They don't have your Craylands and your McDonald's and your McDonald's and stuff like that. So it's staggering, and we do have it here as well, which is a bit of a concern. And there's lots of companies and places and food share and things like that who do a lot of stuff. There's even people like back in, I think it's 2020, there was a footballer called Marcus Rashford, who most people know. He kind of campaigned to get kids school meals during all holidays because they know that the only meals that they were getting were the ones at school, and when they were not, they weren't getting any kind of, because people were in just food poverty. And he's I think it's because he was experiencing that firsthand. So he's took that, his stats, kind of stature kind of thing, to kind of campaign for that kind of thing. And I feel like we should be doing more as a church as well, because it was a thing. I was looking through stuff, and a couple of verses popped up, and it was James 2:15-17, and it was suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you say to them, go in peace, keep warm and be well fed, but does nothing to do anything to help their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself without actions is dead. So it was one of those ones that it's like, we'll let somebody else deal with that kind of thing, but really we should all be, I think, doing something for it and helping it. And I think doing this kind of grew a wee bit of just realisation. Even it's just the tip of the iceberg, because what I was doing is I was, from the night before, finishing what I was having, and then going right through to the next day to dinner time. And there'll be times when I'm like, my stomach was like hurting, but it just kind of makes you realise that people were doing this for like days on end and dying with starvation, and like they didn't have the choice to just go to the corner shop and just get some juice or some crisps or whatever like we do, kind of thing. So it's just how good we kind of get it. And I think we just need to be a wee bit more eyes open to it, and just to help our people in our community as well, because it is people in our communities are struggling with things. So it's just to help.
Thank you so much. My last question, I think you maybe answered it, but how would you encourage others to try fasting based on your experience?
I think just through the things that you were saying as well, like obviously trying it, and obviously I know that people have a whole load of medical issues and stuff like that. I've always had a really bad habit with food and stuff like that, but at the end of it, like there's people in the world who don't have the choice. They starve. Like it's not a case of, I can't do this because I have a bad relationship with food, blah, blah, blah. But people are starving, kind of thing. So I think doing it kind of helps you kind of shift your mindset and softens your heart towards people. And people are starving in the UK and in other countries, and probably in your street and stuff like that. So I think through that kind of helped me soften my heart a wee bit doing it. And I think that, we can do a lot of more practical stuff, given to things and food banks, and not just leaving it to think, it's okay, somebody else will donate stuff. It'll be fine, kind of thing. And I think just watching what you're buying as well, you're not buying like £200 worth of stuff and then half it's just going in the bin, because you're just like, it's fine, I don't really care about it. But really appreciating food as well. That was the other thing as well, was that when I was getting my dinner the next day, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like I was really appreciating it, because you just take it for granted because you're out all day and you're just snacking and stuff. I'm always in the community. I'm going in between people's houses as a support worker, and I'm always in and out the shop. So it's just one of the things you just take for granted. Like we have some money to just go and get some chocolate. Like people don't like have that. That kind of thing. So I would just encourage you to try it, and just even for a little bit, and just to help as well, and just donate. And,
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris. A round of applause. Thank you. You can see why Shelley couldn't say no to him, because he's so passionate about it. So thank you, Chris, for taking time to do that. So this is actually the end of our preaching series, but remember, we have an opportunity to keep exploring fasting on Tuesday evenings from March the 17th, as Esther announced us at the beginning. We know that not everyone can fast food for a number of different health-related reasons, but we always say do what we can, not what you can't. And there's so many ways we can enter into exploring this type of fasting. We're all on a journey together, and we're learning things as we go. But our hope is that as a church, we incorporate fasting into our rule of life and make it a regular, faith-filled, giving practice, just as it's been for the most part of the whole of the church's life. Fasting gives us such an opportunity to align ourselves to God, to pay attention to those in need, to increase our empathy and move us from apathy to action for the situations that God places on our hearts. I'm excited about what God will continue to do in and through us as a church. Because when we keep committing to doing this, when we keep committing to doing away with oppression, injustice, and we spend ourselves on behalf of the poor, Isaiah 58 says this, just to finish. It says, then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. As James asked us last week, are you hungry for more of this? Are you tired of less? Then let's encourage each other to keep aligning ourselves with God's heart, press into this moment and ask God for more of him with us. More healing, more freedom, more restoration, more. I'm going to invite the band to come up as we finish. We're going to sing the song King of Glory. And it has this line in it, which I really want us to meditate on as we sing this morning. It says, heal my heart and make it clean. Open up my eyes to the things unseen. He wants us to pay attention. It says, show me how to love like you have loved me, and break my heart for what breaks yours. The ironic thing about fasting is that it actually can reveal whether we're spiritually hungry or not, whether we feel like we're in dry desert places because of our circumstances, or because we're a bit dry in our walk with Jesus. Or perhaps we're feeling the weight of apathy in the face of such chaos and sadness in the world. Bring that to Jesus this morning as we sing. He is the one who has the springs of living water in the desert for us. Maybe you're in fact struggling to make ends meet this morning. We'd love to pray with you this morning and support you. Remember, one day, on that glorious day that Jesus comes again, there is no fasting again. It's just feasting. That is the God that we worship and serve. So if you'd like to come and use the altar this morning for prayer, I confess to you this morning, I've been preaching this morning on how to treat each other. I wasn't great with my family this morning. We need aligned with God's heart. We need time of confession and alignment with him. So as we sing this song, come and align yourselves with him. He is the King of Glory, the good God who forgives all our sins and propels us towards others in love and in mercy.
Thank you, Emma. Let's all stand together. As Emma said, if you want prayer, feel free to come to the front, or if you want to just take a quiet moment and have a kind of physical response to God from what Emma's prayed, the altar is open.